right, I think it's about time to get started. We have a really interesting presentation today, and I want to allow plenty of time for it. Welcome, I'm Cliff Lynch. I'm the director of the Coalition for Networked Information, and thanks for joining us on this Friday for some of the last of the first week of the fall CNI virtual 2020 member meeting. A couple quick logistical things. This session is being recorded and will be available subsequently. There is closed captioning available if you want it. There is a chat box. Please feel free to introduce yourself or comment as the session goes along. There's also a Q&A tool, and you can use that to queue up questions for the presenters. After the presentation, Diane Goldenberg-Hart will materialize and moderate the Q&A. And I think that's everything I need to say logistically, so let me introduce our session. We have with us today Katie Hoeberling and Fernando Hoces de la Guardia, both from the University of California at Berkeley. So in that sense, they are colleagues of mine. They are with the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in Social Sciences, which is a really important project trying to advance reproducibility and replicability in the social sciences. And they have a really interesting angle on some of the work they're doing, in that they're thinking about how to integrate this as a pedagogical tool, as well as a set of good practices for researchers. And I think that's a really important idea that I'm looking forward to hearing more about. So without further ado, let me thank Katie and Fernando for joining us and turn it over to Katie.
Thanks, Cliff. That was a really great introduction. Yeah, so I won't talk. I won't read this whole slide because I think Cliff has done a good job for me. But I'm Katie. Fernando is also here, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences, of which we're both a part. But today we're focusing on a project that is very much still in progress, but is kind of getting ready for to share with the world, that is trying to advance specifically computational reproducibility. And as Cliff mentioned, also using this as a teaching tool. So, oops, there we go. I'll just give you a quick overview of what I'll be talking about today. So I'll just spend a minute or so on who BITS is. I'll talk to you about why we care about reproducibility. And then I'm hoping to spend the bulk of this presentation on the actual project itself. And at the end, I would love to, since I said this is a in progress project, I would love to get some feedback and your perspectives on what we're doing, because we're at kind of a couple inflection points in terms of the design of the project. So hoping to hear from you all later on. Okay, so BITS, the initiative that both Fernando and I are a part of, our goal is to promote ethical, transparent, and reproducible research in order to improve the integrity of science and eventually to inspire better public policy. And we're doing this in three ways. So we're generating evidence through meta research. We're trying to increase access to open science education. So we run trainings, we develop curriculum, we provide funding to other instructors who are trying to either create their own curriculum or adapt ours for their contexts. And then we also try to strengthen the kind of scientific ecosystem. So a lot of this is through this kind of infrastructural development. Kind of the project that I'm talking today fits pretty squarely under this category. But it also involves kind of developing open science policy with specific partners, and developing protocols for labs and research centers. Okay, so why we care about reproducibility. I think most of you on this call are probably aware of the kind of replication reproducibility crisis that we've been discussing a lot the past couple decades in the social sciences. So I won't get into what these too much into the research on this, but I wanted to kind of get us all on the same page about these two definitions that we're working with. So um, for computational reproducibility, we're really just talking about trying to get the same findings using the same data and the same methods that another researcher has used in a paper that's been published. And there are a number of reasons why this might not happen. Some of the data might be missing, the code might not be well documented, the software that was used originally, the version of that software might not be available anymore, or it might not have been documented in the first place. And so the figure on the right is from a recent paper from Gertler, Galliani, and Romero that it was examining 203 papers published in economics journals. And these were journals with data and code availability policies. So they're kind of the reasons that I just mentioned led to a fairly significant number of findings that weren't reproducible. Um, and then replicability on the other end, where we're talking about using different data and or different methods to find somewhat similar findings, at least in the same direction and within a reasonable margin of error. And the reason that we try to distinguish between these two is because while replication we know is really valuable and really important for trying to understand the credibility of research, we think that it's useful only to the extent that the original work was also reproducible. So someone might not be able to replicate a study, and that could be because the methods were flawed, or it was a it just by chance. But there's also a really good chance that that work just wasn't reproducible, and in that case, it's almost a waste of time. And so we kind of want to get everyone on the same page about starting, not putting the cart before the horse and starting with the reproducibility part first. These are just a kind of this table is just showing you the kind of rates of replication and reproducibility that have been found in recent years. Some of you have probably heard of the open science collaboration. Other efforts have found anywhere between 30 to 60% replication rates, which all things considered isn't so bad. Reproducibility rates, at least in economics, are a little bit more alarming. And this is one of the reasons that we're trying to focus on this. Okay, so the kind of solutions and mitigation strategies that already exist. Some of you probably know about the transparency and openness promotion, or TOP guidelines. So these are a tiered version of a tiered guidelines for journal policies that include anything from pre-registration to sharing data to all the way to pre-publication verification. It's a mouthful, but basically that just means that the findings in a paper must be verified prior to publication. So that means that the data and the code that the author provide must get the same findings that they are claiming to have found in the paper. And there are, I think, maybe a couple dozen journals that we know of that are doing this now. Notably, the American Economic Association, or AEA, released a new policy last year that does this. And this was kind of one of the motivations for the project that I'll talk to you about in a minute or so. We're working with the AEA data editor to try to make it easier both for him to verify the reproducibility of the work that's submitted to him, as well as prepare the discipline of economics for complying with this policy moving forward. So the AEA manages 9 or 10 of the top journals in economics. And so kind of what the policies that they adopt hopefully kind of trickle to other economics journals in the discipline. They're pretty influential. And so the idea is to kind of prepare the discipline at large for being able to do this. I mentioned this list, just a few others. So a couple of journals in political science, as well as Nature Methods and Metapsychology, are also doing this. And then I'm sure all of you know about these tools, but the kind of the other side of enabling reproducibility we see as this digital infrastructure. So your data repositories, your version control tools like GitHub, dynamic documents. I have Jupyter here, but in our trainings, we generally focus on the just dynamic documents using Stata or R, which are the software programs that are generally more used by social scientists. And okay, so I wanted to show you, this is from a recent paper from Garrett Christensen and colleagues, just kind of showing you the rapid rates of adoption that have happened in the last decade or so, especially for sharing data and study instruments. So this is, this makes us feel a little bit better about what's happening in the social sciences. But this is focusing on economists, political scientists, sociologists, and psychologists. Um, but what this doesn't do is this doesn't show us anyone who's not publishing in the top 10 journals in their discipline. That was their sample, or the or graduate students who are in the top 10 grad programs in the United States in their discipline. While this is exciting for us, and kind of justifies a lot of the work that we've been doing for the past 9 or 10 years, we're wondering who is left out by this. And it's not unlikely that the rates of adoption would be lower for people who are not publishing in these journals or going to these programs. Um, so that kind of leads me to my last slide on the motivation for this project. We've been thinking a lot about what scholarship means. I think a lot of people, when they think of scholarship, are thinking about the article, the main findings of an article, the conclusion. Um, and I think something that we've been a more inclusive and broader definition that we have been working with has been the Claerbout principle, that was paraphrased here by Buckhead and Donahoe. I'll just read for you really quickly. An article about computational results is advertising, not scholarship. The actual scholarship is the full software environment, code, and data that produce the result. Um, so what we're hoping to do with this project that I'll talk about in a sec is to kind of improve access to all of the data, the code, and the decisions that went into creating this final product that is going to be published in the journal. The image we have here on the left is from The Garden of Forking Paths by Borges. And so you can kind of think of a paper as being the red line from point A to point B. But what it doesn't necessarily tell you is how the researcher got to point A in the first place, if they tried all these other paths and then didn't decide to go down them, or if they did go down them, and it didn't work out. All of that is useful knowledge, but it's generally not going to be published in a paper. So having access to that knowledge can not only kind of accelerate our understanding of the world and of science, as well as supporting the learning of people who are digging through the materials and the data and the code to use for their own research. We also see it as improving inclusion and participation in science. Um, so you can think of a lot of recent studies about kind of privilege and inequality in academia recently have been revealing that there have been unequal access to opportunities to learn from your instructors, to learn from your peers. So you can think about things like homework groups, office hours, knowing when and how to ask for help, who to ask help from. And so there seems to be like a growing body of literature about that. Our hunch is that there's also kinds of implicit knowledge that continues into graduate school and beyond. So you can think about things like how to ask for data, how to talk to people about their research after it's already been published, how decisions in research are made. You can even take it all the way to how to navigate authorship conversations. But in the context of reproducibility, it's really difficult without the full set of decisions and data and code to know exactly how someone got somewhere. Um, and so a big part of our motivation is trying to improve access to that in an equitable way. Okay, so the Acre project itself, this project includes kind of four major activities. We're developing curriculum, which I'll show you in a sec. We are training students and instructors on both how to go through the curriculum and how to teach it, how to adapt it for their own courses. We're developing an online platform that is going to help us crowdsource reproductions, as well as improvements, and then also spur discussion around this work. And eventually, once we have enough reproductions, we're hoping to conduct a few assessments of reproducibility across journals and fields. Okay, so the curriculum starts out with this guide. The Acre Guide is a set of step-by-step instructions for conducting and recording a reproduction. And notably, it includes chapters on how to choose a paper, how to assess reproducibility, how to make improvements, how to conduct robustness checks, and also how to have constructive conversations with authors. Um, One thing that I wanted to show you, I'm actually not sure if the sharing is going to let me do this, but I might have to do a new share. Let's see. Okay. So one thing I wanted to show you, this is part of the guide, and I included the URL in the slides. One thing that we are hoping to do with this project is to help people move away from these kind of binary statements about, this paper is reproducible or it's not reproducible, and instead identify what exactly makes it not reproducible, not just at the paper level, but at the claim level. A paper might include several claims within it. So, it might end up being that, some of the cleaning code was gone or it was missing. And the student or the reproducer, whoever they are, suggests new cleaning code to add to the code that was already shared. Or if no code was shared at all, they can suggest code and move the paper or the claim from level 6 reproducibility to level 7. And we're hoping that helps foster more constructive conversations around this kind of thing. And because the idea is not just to say this is reproducible or not, it's to move the fields of social sciences forward. I'll go back to the slides. Okay, this is back on the slides, right? I'm not quite sure what people are seeing.
Yeah, you're on the slides.
Great. Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about how this has been going. This has generally taken 2 to 4 weeks of graduate courses that we've piloted this with. It kind of just depends on how far you want your students to get into stuff. We've also piloted this with one undergraduate who conducted their undergraduate thesis on this, and it took them a whole year, but they were getting really, really deep into the details of a specific paper. So far, we have piloted this with 37 reproductions, mostly in development economics courses. And so far, people have seemed to enjoy this, and they've actually found fairly high rates of reproducibility. So it's just within one discipline, but so far it's going all right. And so the kind of incentives or benefits for the people doing this might differ depending on where they are in their career. We're kind of thinking that graduate students might be more interested in getting credit for making their improvements or assessing reproducibility, as well as for kind of having language to discuss papers after they've been published, as well as learning what the process is or should be for accessing data and materials, how to talk with authors, and empowering them to carry out these exercises as they move forward in their careers. And then undergrads, as I mentioned earlier, might be more interested in kind of getting a closer view of what research is and what it entails. Okay, the platform itself. This is exciting for me because we've just gotten to a place where we're pretty comfortable sharing this fairly widely. But the Social Science Reproduction Platform, or the SSRP, is an open source online platform for crowdsourcing these reproductions. Just a couple weeks ago, we got our Crossref membership, so we'll be able to assign DOIs, so these reproductions will be citable. And we're hoping to, in the next month or so, to integrate the discourse forum. So this is an open source online forum where people will hopefully be able to, give feedback on other people's attempts to reproduce or their improvements, ask questions, ask for help. And then eventually, I mentioned this as well, the kind of aggregated results on a metrics dashboard showing the levels of reproducibility of certain subfields and journals, et cetera. The figure here on the right is from the platform, and I also wanted to show you that. So I think I'll do a new share. Okay, so this is the platform. I also included the URL in the slides, and I'll share these afterwards if you want to take a closer look. But this is what it looks like so far. The main thing I wanted to show you, I'm signed in here, is kind of what the start of one of these forms look like. So I already started one. This is a dummy, but so it's got a kind of a not super helpful titles and data, but I'll show you anyway. You kind of start out with entering the basic information about the paper that you're trying to reproduce. You've got your REPEC handle. This will be different depending on the discipline, but in economics, REPEC is a helpful database of papers that have been published regardless of journal working paper status. Your title, your journal, the year of publication, the DOI, the authors. Importantly, it asks you if there is a package, a reproduction package already available. And if there isn't, it takes you to this question of, have you contacted the authors for the package? If you click no, you can't move on. So the idea is that they have to then go to the guidelines. We've got a chapter here on having constructive conversations with reproducers, or sorry, with original authors. The part that I wanted to show you was we've actually, sorry, here we go. We've developed a few email templates. So trying to make it as easy as possible for people to talk to these authors. So we've got, the salutation. I'm contacting you to talk specifically about this paper. So being as clear as possible, who they are, where they are, why they're trying to reproduce this in the first place. Often it'll just be because they're doing this as part of coursework. And what exactly they were able to find and what they weren't able to find. Taking that all the way through, requesting specific missing items, asking for additional guidance, responding when people have refused to share, or if they haven't really given a reason, etc. So the idea is that, there has been, let me get back to the slides. There's been, I'm not sure if that was the right one. Here we go. There's been kind of a history, at least in economics and other social sciences, of, retaliation when people have tried to conduct these reproductions. Sometimes these conversations can become hostile. And the idea is that we hope to try to guide people through discussions in a way that is going to avoid any of that kind of language. And make it a learning process, both for the student and for the author, in terms of how to actually make their work reproducible, moving it from level 2 to level 8 or whatever it is. The last thing I wanted to mention before I kind of open it up for questions is that we are hoping to make it easy for people to build on top of other people's attempts to reproduce. So someone might have spent a few weeks trying to assess this reproduction, assess this paper for reproducibility. Their course ends. Someone else wants to go back to that paper and make improvements. And instead of having to contact the author, bother that person again, there's a record of that person having contacted them, what they said, what they were able to provide, and what, how far the first reproducer got in terms of assessing or improving. And then the next person can more easily build on top of that work. So saving some time there as well. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about was that, so I mentioned that we're still in progress. There are a lot of open questions that we have, especially as we're getting ready to launch. The main one is if and how to allow anonymous reproductions. So I talked about kind of the risk to reputations that people have perceived and felt in the past. So we want to balance that with, we don't want to create a space for trolls on the internet. There's also been a history in economics of toxicity in some of these online forums. So we're trying to balance we're trying to create this kind of constructive space for discussion. Also, de-identifying these attempts is definitely not foolproof. The most we can do, we think, is to give people guidance on how to de-identify, their code. But it's, like I said, if you're using GitHub especially, you're going to have to go through the whole thing and make sure your name is gone from all of your commits, which could be pretty tedious. We're considering kind of embargo periods. So if you do a reproduction anonymously, then maybe within 2 to 4 years, then it automatically becomes non-anonymous. And we're also trying to understand how to assess quality for those kinds of reproductions. Other open questions we've got are how to integrate other research databases. I talked about RePEC, but there's lots of other ones in different disciplines. And then generally just how to get buy-in from social scientists for this. How do we demonstrate and communicate the value of this? Maybe it's an encouraging citation, or maybe it's more just that we want to improve the field of economics in general. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions. Fernando is also here for questions, but we also would love to just hear from the audience if they have ideas about any of these questions that I've posed, or thoughts about the platform in general. So I'll open it up.
Thanks, Katie. That's a really fascinating tool, really interesting, and it's great to hear about it. I just want to let our attendees know that, of course, you can certainly type your questions into the Q&A, but I think Katie and Fernando would love to hear directly from you about some of these questions that she raised and other issues surrounding their development in this tool. If you have something to add to the conversation and you would like to be unmuted, just raise your hand and we can definitely unmute you so that you can interact directly with Katie and Fernando, or type your questions or comments in the chat, or in the Q&A, and I can definitely moderate those here now. I just want to remind everyone that this is CNI's Fall 2020 membership meeting. We'll have another webinar coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be the Catholic News Archive. I know there are a lot of things going on this week, especially today. Thank you so much for spending some time here at CNI.
So Diane, while we're waiting for people to jump in, I just want to say that was a wonderful presentation, and I think you've produced a really potentially very powerful platform here. I'm wondering if you can share a little more about the reaction from faculty who have been looking at this as they think about using this in the context of their own classes, and in particular, maybe what kinds of classes, what level of students, those sorts of things.
Yeah, Fernando, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So far we have presented in one academic seminar where faculty were very curious about it. They seemed interested about adopting the tool, but there was no specific commitment of who and when they will take it. We are aiming to do pilots with several courses in the spring across different universities. And the target audience for this would be second year students of graduate courses, masters or PhDs, where they are doing some applied work, and this exercise of doing reproductions are somewhat standard part of their curriculum. We just want to give them these tools to make it the reporting process of this exercise to standardize it.
Yeah, the two courses that we've piloted in already have been in Ted Miguel's courses, and he's one of the PIs on this project. So it was easy to get his buy-in. But yeah, we're hoping to identify a few more this next semester in the spring, and figure out how easily or how hard it is to kind of adapt this for a full course. I guess I'll also say, so the AEA data editor, Lars Vilhuber, who's also a partner on this project, he's the one who's in charge of running these verifications for AEA journals. He does this with undergraduate students. And his policy is that if an undergraduate student can't understand what you've done, then you need to work on it to make it more easily understandable. And so, it might take an undergraduate longer to, do this as part of like a thesis project or something. But at the end of the day, whatever is published should be fairly clear.
Yeah, that's part of what I was thinking was this is an opportunity to provide an amazing educational experience for an undergraduate, in terms of really coming to grips with a piece of published research.
Yeah, and the guidelines of this project are structured in a way that in order to do a reproduction, you do not need to have in-depth knowledge of the specific paper. Basically, the idea is that in the initial stages, what you need to be able to identify is what's the scientific claim that is being made in the paper. And okay, so what's the set of scientific claims? Among that set, which one would you focus on? And then the other thing that you need to focus is, for a given claim, you need to be able to find the result in the paper supporting that claim. So this result might be one number in a table in a paper. So you provide the location, you say that's my target, this is the claim, and then you go look at the reproduction materials and how far can you get along into basically being able to run the car, so to say, to get to get to that point. And the last stage is about robustness, and that requires a little bit more in-depth knowledge. So it has to do with like how to tinker things to see how the results change. But it's definitely, the materials are definitely developed with the mindset of a broad audience.
That's great. It's really interesting. It's a great tool. And we'll look forward to seeing what comes out of these questions that you're asking and investigating.
Yeah, one thing I'm really curious about downstream as this matures is there are many folks in academic and research libraries who actually get quite involved in teaching these kinds of skills. And it would be very interesting to see how they begin to make use of or make reference to this body of work for folks that they're teaching outside of the sort of, formal curriculum, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think librarians for the past couple of years, we've realized are some of our closest allies on this campus. So we'll definitely be working with them to figure out if they can not necessarily, put it in a course, but how they can integrate it into their work with students too.
All right, I will shut up now. I've been monopolizing all the Q&A on this fantastic presentation.
Well, thanks, Cliff, for the questions. And thank you, Katie and Fernando, for your thoughtful responses and this great presentation. We are a little bit past time now. So I'm going to close down the public portion of the presentation. I'll stop the recording. We do have a few attendees still with us here. And if they're interested in approaching the podium and having a chat with you after we've turned off the recording, just raise your hands. I'll be happy to turn on your microphones. And thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks to all our attendees. Bye-bye.
Thank you.